seconds once we go live to drop it into Instagram.
Sure.
And we'll invite you as a collaborator on all the Instagram posts as
cool.
well, which is something we're just starting to do finally. And I think it's kind of a newer thing anyway for Instagram, or at least new to us.
Yeah, I tried to hook this up to my LinkedIn. I was like, I can stream it on LinkedIn. And they're like, you need to have 150. And I was like,
yes. Yeah. LinkedIn has a weird.
I do though, I think. I was like, I'm not going to.
No, and it's weird because I do another podcast for a nonprofit, and they do have over 150 followers on LinkedIn, and it still won't let us do it. So it's LinkedIn's a little goofy. All right, cool. Here we go. Phil. All right. Okay. I think we got it. All right. All right. Today, our guest is Phil Wells from the Marcus Wells team with Corcoran in New York City. Let me tell you more about Phil. Now, as a founding partner of the Marcus Wells team, Phil Wells brings a positive and proactive force in virtually any scenario, inspiring his team and while gaining new satisfied clients. The one thing he hears over and over again from clients and teammates is, Phil, I feel so much better after talking with you. With a decade of experience in the Manhattan and Brooklyn real estate market and hundreds of closed transactions, and we should say hundreds of millions of dollars in closed transaction volume, he has the experience, the knowledge, and the know-how to get the deal done. In addition to running New York's city-based business, Phil also runs a real estate YouTube channel that gets over 150,000 unique views per month, where he tours castles, chateaus, country homes, and even private islands. We're going to talk about that with Phil. I want everybody to follow Phil on his YouTube channel. And easiest way to do that, we're going to have a link in our show notes, or just go into YouTube, type in Philip Wells with one L, Philip Wells with two L's, Philip with one L, Philip Wells Real Estate. Again, link in our show notes. Check out some of his videos, which some of them have gone viral, and he goes around the world and tours these unbelievable properties, and it has skyrocketed his YouTube channel. And also, please follow him on Instagram, where a lot of these videos show up as well, which is at Phil Wells _RE. Link to that as well in the show notes. Phil, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, DJ.
I'm super excited to talk with you because, number one, I just got back from New York City, and I have such a, I think most of us have such fond experiences, visiting New York. And I always think, like, if I was just a little wealthier, maybe I'd live there. But I'm happy here in Chicago, but I do love visiting. And so grateful to be able to talk to somebody somebody who practices in New York, because I think it is a really difficult market. Obviously, we know the pricing is like there, but would love to kind of go all the way back to the beginning of your story. I know you're not originally from New York, but how did you get to New York? How did you start in real estate?
Yeah, well, I feel like people's start in real estate is always a little bit interesting. People come. It can be a second career for some. For me, it was really a first career. I'm just hitting, just over 10 years now in real estate. When I first started, I had moved to the city, very much like 2 suitcases and a dream, just loved New York. And I didn't have that much of a plan. Besides, I was helping my father at the time with a small publishing company that wasn't a big concern, but it gave me just enough to pay basically the rent and scrape a little extra money for something else. I know that if you pay over 40% of your income in rent, you're rent burdened. I was very rent burdened. Let's put it that way. I came out here with a couple $1,000s in my, account and 2 suitcases. And it was a big risk, but when you're in your early 20s, it's like, all right, I can take that risk. So I found a place. I found a room that I rented in there was like a 10-room house that I was renting in. It was kind of a crazy place to live for a couple of months, but I, kind of found my footing in New York. That was way out in Bushwick, and it was a cool place. And I met some people, some of which were doing real estate, and they were doing, rentals, and rentals is a big market, out in New York. So I was doing, I saw what they were doing, but then I also was interested in it, but not necessarily with who with that particular company, because they weren't really the most credible company.
Mm.
So I did what I always do in these situations, which I reached out to a bunch of people in the industry and tried to set up little, one-on-ones and informational interviews. And then I met, through a friend of a friend of a friend, I met someone who was working for the Corcoran Group, which at that time was one of the bigger companies. And after a quick meeting with the managing broker at the Fort Greene office, Juliana Brown DeRiggs, who will always have I'll have a soft spot for, she decided that, she would take a risk on this kid from Idaho who really had no connections.
Yeah, no sphere of influence, right?
No sphere of influence. I knew about 6 people in the city, and I had some sales experience, from stuff I'd done in college, but I mean that was pretty much it. I just, it was one of those. I'm really happy she took a chance on me, and what she told me, which when I first started, was, although this isn't a 9-to-5 job, I want you to be in the office at 9 a.m. and I want you to work more than 40 hours a week in the office. That desk over there is yours. That computer over there is yours. I want you to be here all the time that you're not out with clients. And I really took that to heart in the first year. I was just in the office, learning what I could, absorbing what I could. And I really credit a lot of my early deals, my early success to being in the office.
Thank you. That's a really, I love when I hear a story like this, where it's very much a similar story that I've heard a lot, but I think we can't ever hear it enough, which is, there's these little foundational skills or foundational habits that we all, could benefit from, whether it's, exercising more or, being more present for our families or, our relationships, or like maybe treating this like an actual job from 9 to 5, because I find that is absolutely one of the most common characteristics among top producers, is they treat it like it's a job. I have to be there at a certain time. I stay a certain amount of time, and then I go home. And yeah, of course, you have more freedom than that. But I love the idea of treating it like an actual job. I suspect people would do a lot better in this business if they went, even if they went somewhere in their own house every day from 9 to 5 and really treated it that way. Now, I'm curious, so you're at this desk, you're absorbing what you're hearing and going on, within the brokerage. But what are you doing actually to go grow your business? You didn't have, you knew 6 people, but what were you actually doing to move the business forward?
Yeah. So at that time, there was an agent who sat across from me I was learning a lot from, who had, he was a sole operator. He wasn't a member of any team or anything like that. He'd been in the business for like 30 years, and I would listen a lot to him and I'd bounce ideas off of him. But yeah, boy, it was tough for the first bit. We did get a certain amount of what we called floor duty. I don't know. I'm thinking of, other agents. It's not as common in New York because a lot of our offices don't have a retail storefront, but this one happened to. So it was in Fort Greene, 65 Lafayette Avenue. I know because I wrote that so many times on handwritten, letters to, co-ops, condos nearby, townhouses. So that was one thing I was doing, is I would try to get out mail, just as much mail with handwritten front. I don't know if it still works as much these days, but it did work then. Getting people to reach back out, to expireds, but even people who had just owned for like that 7 to 10 year range, where, if it's a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, they might be looking to make a move. They might be looking to rent it out. They might be, so that was something I would target. I would target a little bit of rentals that were turning over. Just, you got to imagine 11 months into a lease, they're thinking either that tenant's going to move out or not. And then I had a mentor, Jean was her name, and I was helping her with her listings for free. So I just said, Jean, I'm here for you. Open houses, weekends, whatever, I'll help you go take photos for this listing. I was just going all over. And one of the deals, she wasn't always in her office, and she said I could answer her phone. So I answered her phone, and my first sale came from answering an angry call that was yelling at me about. So I pick up the phone, and she says, "Does this listing even have a dishwasher?" And I said, "Well, thanks for calling today. I'm not sure which listing you're talking about. What's the address that you're looking at?" 55 Pineapple 2J. Well, let me look it up. It's in our system. Thanks for calling Corcoran, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up saying, and I don't want to say her name, but I ended up saying, she was looking for her son and she was frustrated because it never said in the listings. And it never said whether it had a dishwasher. So I told her, no matter what, we're going to find your son an apartment that he's happy with, and it's going to have a dishwasher. Just use me, and I'm going to take you all around the city. We're going to find this for you. And it was my first deal. And, it was a co-purchase with her and her son for $550,000 on Second Avenue. And it's funny, you just remember all of the addresses and deals, that you do. But that was, how'd I get my start? It was just grinding. I mean, there was nothing easy about the first couple of years.
Yeah, it never is. It seems to be even the agents that do have more immediate success seem to still, unless they're just extraordinarily fortunate, tend to grind it out for the first 2 to 4 years. And then hopefully by then it starts, business starts kind of coming in a little bit more easily. So I like this. You partnered with, not only did you find a place that wanted you to come into the office and sort of absorb the knowledge that was being shared inside of those walls, and then also partnering with other brokers in the office. You sat across from somebody, you were able to listen to them. You were also able to, for free, say, hey, I will help you with your listings, Mrs. or Miss Broker. And that is typically, I find that people who are willing to do things for free, which I know is not comfortable for anybody. Nobody wants to do anything for free because, of course, we all have bills to pay. But I do find that people who are willing to do that kind of work usually succeed. Sort of, not sure if there's more to that, but it seems to be the pathway to success seems to be a little bit about contribution along the way, and just sort of willing to do things that maybe, the extra mile or going above and beyond.
Well, definitely. Agents are very quick once you start providing value to them to say, hey, I'll give you 10% of this deal. When it closes, I'll give you 10, 20. I mean, I started at 10%. I started at 0. Then I went to 10%. And then I started saying, look, I'll work with you. I'll do the bulk of the work on this for 25%. Or, but what I found is doing the math, it's probably different in New York where the commissions are higher. But, if I'm working on someone with a $1.1 million listing at 3% to the seller side, which is, what we were tending to do, that's a $33,000 gross commission. 10% of that was $3,300. Then I had my own split and everything, but just talking about the GCI.
Sure.
Versus if they were, and the amount of work that I was, say I was putting in 10 or 20 hours or 30 hours for that. Well, for me, that was $100 an hour at the time with future upside, right? Whereas if they were paying me $50 a showing, that's just not the way. I think that if you're doing that showing, this showing, you're never going to do 100 showings for an agent, but they pretty quickly will trust you, and if you're working with them, it's good faith, and you're also going to learn from them. I just think that partnering with more senior agents in your office can be that's what I'm glad I stumbled into it. But for the young agents listening now and just getting their start, that's, I think, the thing that helped me the most.
I've heard it time and time again, and I'm glad to hear it one more time with you, because it does seem to be the pathway, or at least the easier path than doing it all yourself without, that kind of support, and just being around people who are smarter, or at least smarter within the industry, or they've been experienced longer or have additional skills that you haven't yet developed, is they tend to kind of rub off on you too. Like I find that, just through, immersion, you're there and hearing people do their pitches, hearing how they handle objections on the phone, hearing how they handle an angry client, and understanding, oh, I could do that. And yeah, there's so much learning that goes on that I think a lot of agents could benefit from if they spent more time with some of those senior agents. I really want to jump into your YouTube videos, because this is such a unique thing that you do. And it really gets me excited, because after 600 plus episodes of the show, I don't get to hear too many sort of new and exciting ideas as often as I'm sure I would love to. And what you did is very unique, and it worked out really well for you. And it was fun. Before we started recording, Phil was starting to tell me the story, and you could just see his whole face kind of lit up when he was telling how exciting this all was. So let's kind of go to the beginning of, your social media marketing or your video marketing Tell us how that's evolved, and then we'll get to sort of, the what you're doing now, and how that's really accelerated the amount of visibility you have.
Sure. Well, I would say a lot of it, I'm actually going to credit a lot of this, the origin of this, to working with an influencer in New York. His name was Cash Jordan. And he did a lot of, you might be familiar with him.
I am.
Yeah, he did a lot, like almost a daily video for a long time about, rental apartments, starting out with rental apartments. And then he started doing I started to see him do a few more higher value, higher ticket ones. And I immediately reached out to him because, again, I send a lot of cold emails to people just, hey, I see what you're doing. I support it. I'm always, if I'm thinking about them for longer than 5-10 minutes, I'm just going to send an email, because why not reach out? And as long as you're okay with a 10 or 20% response rate, then just reach out to people and say hello. They'll often be supportive of what you're doing, or they won't have time. But anyway, I'm always encouraging people, if you're in sales, do cold reach outs. It also helps you hone that writing skill, and you see what works and you see what doesn't work. Anyway, I reached out to Cash and I said, hey, we have a lot of, listings right now we'd love to promote. Maybe you want to come and do a tour of something for sale, not for rent. It's right near this one. You just did one on 55th Street. This is on 56th Street. Let's take a look. So he reached right back out. He's like, yeah, I'd love to do that. Let's schedule it for a couple of weeks from now. So after doing, 1, 2, 3, 10, 12 of these with him on his YouTube channel, I started to see the power of it. I actually got someone to reach out directly to me saying, hey, me and my wife are looking for an apartment. And I said, oh, okay, hold on. Because they said, it seems like you do a lot of work in this neighborhood. It seems like you do a lot of work. So I said, and a lot of people in the comments said that Phil should have his own channel. And I was starting to say, maybe I should. But it just seemed like a whole nother, as the business was increasing and as we were starting to put a team together, it seemed like a lot to do. So I was a little intimidated by it. I didn't do anything for 6 months. And then I thought, you know what? I got to do something here. So I started doing Instagram videos, shorter form, TikTok, all the stuff that everyone else is kind of doing. And I wasn't getting a lot of traction with it. And then I started from scratch thinking, what could I do that's so different and so much bigger that people would have to watch? They'd just be like, what's really, really, really interesting? And I started with what's really interesting to me, which is like these grand castles and chateaus and high dollar things, but not just like an Ines Yilmazer type of Beverly Hills type of home, but something that's historic and, just dramatic and really cool. And then I saw Dunbeath Castle, which is the one that I think you said you saw this castle in Scotland. And I tried my approach. I reached out to them and I said, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'm proposing. I'll fly over there with my crew and everything. And, it'll be kind of similar to this that I've done, but it's going to be even higher quality. And didn't hear back for a couple of weeks. Didn't really think anything of it. But my birthday was coming up and I had a birthday trip that I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Europe. I kind of wanted to do this anyway. So I reached out to a bunch of I was like, well, if I can't get that one, I'm going to try to get this one. So I reached out to about 10 more. And then, DJ, something happened that got me kind of freaked me out a little bit. All of them started getting back to me 2 weeks later, and they all started saying yes. So I was like, oh boy, now I have
free publicity. Sure. We'll take that.
Yeah. And you're going to produce a 10 to 20 minute video on our property. You're going to pay for everything. You're going to fly over here. Great, let's do it. You're going to do it for free. So then I had to backpedal a little bit and say, okay, I can do these. Maybe I can do a trip. I can do one a day. I can do 4. And I didn't realize what I was getting involved in as far as the scripting, the editing, just the sheer amount of work that one 20-minute video takes. You think, oh, I'm going to record it. That'll take maybe 1 day. I can probably edit it in a week, get it out there, get it done. I learned it's a little more than that. But they started performing. They started doing pretty well. And it got really exciting to see that, it was 10 times the effort, but it was getting 1,000 times the results, which is what was really cool.
And so how much time would you estimate you spent on some of those videos each? Being that you thought, well, it'd probably take a week. And also, we should mention you're a full-time realtor too. So this isn't something that you're doing as your only sort of, marketing thing. So how long does it actually take you to edit a 20-minute video?
Yeah. So I was surprised that a professional editor will take about 2 hours per minute of finished product, something like that. So when you're budgeting editing time, I always thought this stupid 3-minute video just took me 8 hours to edit. I must be an idiot. It must be, when I was trying it on DaVinci or whatever myself. There's a lot of good free editing software that you can use now. There's a ton of good, if you have the time, if you're a new agent, you have the time to learn editing. Not only can you probably start editing for other agents and charge and make a side business out of that, but there's so many good ways of learning it just by watching, tutorials on YouTube and that sort of thing. So I would encourage people who have an interest in that to do it. But I would not necessarily encourage an agent who has an existing bit of business to think that it's only going to be, just make sure you budget the time needed for it. And boy, is it depressing when you put something out that only gets, 1,000 views or whatever, and you've put so much time, So how long does it take? I hired the editing out. So, I was, how much does it cost? Probably, it could be on the low end, 1,000 to 2,000 per video of a, on the high end, maybe 5,000, but I was hiring, pretty good editors, and I wasn't afraid of some investment in this project. Because I thought it would have, not necessarily that it would come back in the form of like ad revenue, but I thought it would come back, if I get one client and I generate 50,000 in GCI off it,
yeah,
it's paid for the whole project and it increases the brand value and everything. So, but then again, it also, what really encouraged me towards this whole project in the first place was getting more listings because of what I could offer new clients. So we just
say more about that.
Well, so what I noticed is we tend to get a lot of a really good closing ratio for our pitch ratio. So, if we go on, my partner Pam and I do a really good presentation in person, and I think that there's something about our presentation that, I come in, I'm kind of the ideas guy. I have a lot of, here's 8 things we can do that no one else has done, from artistic renderings of, the rooms, to coming in with renovation ideas to, painting and staging. And, but then, hiring a drone that is pretty tough to do in New York because of the airspace stuff. A drone that will open the window, it'll fly into the apartment and it'll, just a little razzle dazzle that a lot of other agents just don't do. And I think that it's not that one idea will totally sell the person on us, but it's that we're bringing energy and enthusiasm to a listing that otherwise, it might just be someone who's just going to take photos and do a floor plan and put it up on, on our equivalent of Zillow. And anyway, one thing that I kept getting and hearing from clients is that they're interested in video way more than when I started, in the industry. That wasn't really a thing. And I just kept hearing it more and more. And I was like, you know what? I guess I'm going to have to become an expert in video just so that we can close more pitches. We can get more listings. And so that was kind of where I started with going back to Cash Jordan. There were several listings where I said, look, we're going to get this featured. We're going to get 500,000 views on this property. And we've already seen results with it, but it's going to help, right? And we're going to bring Cash Jordan in. And so we did. And, he knew that helped us. He was doing well with, with ad revenue and everything. And he also owned a real estate company. So it was helping him. It was helping us. But eventually I knew that, you don't want to build your house on land that you rent, right? You kind of want your own platform. You want your own thing. And ultimately I'm glad I did, because he's been doing more news-based content lately. And so, it would have been bad if I was 100% relying on his distribution.
Sure.
So anyway, that was kind of the idea of, it's funny, you start something with a certain approach of this is why it's going to be beneficial. And then it ends up being beneficial in other ways. And, so I can talk more about those, but there's so much to talk about with, with video and real estate. I feel like there's been a big boom in it in the last year or so. So, Yeah, I'll let you lead.
No, I was very impressed watching the Dunheath. I'm trying
Or
to think.
Dunbeath. Yeah.
Sorry, Dunbeath, the Dunbeath Castle in Scotland. I'm actually fortunate enough to go to. I'm going to Scotland
Ooh.
next year with my father. He's a big
Great.
golfer. He's been
Uh-huh.
there twice already. I have not been there, and I said, "Do you want to go back a third time?" Because he asked, "We should go to Scotland." He's getting older, and do you want to do a father son trip? And I was so honored that he wants to go with me, and or invited me. And I said, "Well, you've been there twice." He goes, "Yeah, but I've only golfed there." He goes, "I've really never toured the country, so we're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
do a little bit of both." But we might
You
even
will.
visit that castle. Who
You
knows?
will love it. So there's a public castle right there. That's a big area for golfing, actually. So like Brora is one of the towns that we stayed in. There's a beautiful golf course there, and a lot of people go there specifically for golfing. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
be. It's Caithness is the area. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if you go to that area. If you do, Dunrobin Castle is a public castle with beautiful gardens right on the. It's just you have to go there. You'll drive
Yeah.
right by it on Highway A1. But one thing that is surprised me is the food in Scotland was some of the best food. We had just come from Paris. We were in the south of France. We were eating like kings. We went to Scotland, and the food was even better. Like it was literally
That
the
I
best
was not
food.
expecting.
It was some of the best food I've ever eaten, from the
Wow.
baked goods to preserves. Like they have all these little like berries and stuff. They like on the toast every morning. It was like so good. The like the meat was all like grass fed, local. I couldn't believe how good the food was.
That's great to hear.
Amazing food. You're gonna
I was,
love it. Like
it's not all just haggis and and
no,
Scotch eggs and all of that.
no, but that stuff's good too. Like I just
It is.
I couldn't believe how good the food was. Like I was
Yeah.
just like expecting it not to be great, and then I was so impressed by it that yeah. Anyway, but the scenery, the like, it's so cool. I
Yeah.
loved it there. I loved it.
I've done Ireland. I actually did that with my dad years ago,
Mhm.
and Scotland's just as beautiful, more beautiful maybe. Certainly, a place to go visit, especially for anyone who's a golfer. But let's talk. I want to go back to the YouTube video. So you flew to Scotland. You got approval. You brought someone with you to help shoot. You started editing, or you hired out for the editing. And this particular video did really, really well. You have over 1 million views on it. And I'd love to know sort of what did that do for your channel? And also, what did that do for your exposure within the real estate industry? And also, like, did it impact I know I'm asking 3 questions at once,
Yeah,
but it's very poor interviewing technique. But just want to hear how it impacted your business. Yeah.
Sure. Well, there have been some, we have a ton of listings coming up. So that's been something where I can sort of, it's something I can offer now, that I'm going to put this on a channel that gets, it's not so much the YouTube lately hasn't been nearly as much about your subscriber count, but it is more about kind of your momentum, your how many returning viewers you have. And it's hard to, the YouTube algorithm is, we could have a whole podcast just on that, right? But we have a $12 million listing coming up in downtown Brooklyn that is like a beautiful historic townhouse that is fantastic. We have a nice $30,000 a month rental in Tribeca coming up. Another $12 million listing or $11 million on Fifth Avenue. Like we have like $30 million of exclusives that are coming. A lot of which have been, I think, when people start to associate you with higher value stuff, it becomes easier. Like I haven't even really been able to, like it used to be my range was like maybe even like 1 to 5 million. And it just seems like we've been getting a lot of higher end stuff. And a lot of that has been, I'm getting more comfortable with it because now I'm more comfortable walking through a $20 million property. So I think it comes across to now I'm giving myself permission to go after that kind of business. And it seems to be that the reputation of me, touring and really speaking credibly about these properties and helping sell them really is connecting with my clients and my potential clients in pitches and in marketing. And they're saying, oh yeah, he does that kind of thing. Now let me give it to him in New York. So I think that being associated with it and being able to credibly speak about these properties and learning about all this. I mean, I'm having Like I need to know all the specifics of every type of stone, of every, because if a million people are going to see this, I can't mess up, you know. And if I do,
Right,
it
because
just
if the
kills me.
content is, I'm sorry, just going to
Yeah.
interject. If your content in your video isn't good, YouTube knows that immediately because they see when people bounce out
Mhm.
and go to another video, and you're penalized for that if they bounce out too quickly. You know, they have their own algorithm to sort of keep you engaged, and if that doesn't keep you engaged, they're going to devalue that video.
Yeah.
Obviously, this value has not been devalued, so you really do have to have a keen eye to detail, like what's going to capture the intended audience's attention, and what's going to sustain their attention, and that takes a lot of planning, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it definitely the thinking about what's most unique and interesting about the property. What are people going to want when they see a thumbnail? You definitely want them to click, and a lot is about your title and thumbnail, of course. But once they're in, they also need to be actually getting what they were offered, right?
Right.
You don't, you know, you want something that's interesting and sort of teasing them, but not, you don't want to do a complete clickbait because they, you know, they're going to say, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, or,
Right.
and then they leave, and then YouTube does penalize you. So, but yeah, back to the, you know, kind of the idea of what this has done. Yeah, it's been a huge expense, right? Like, you know, to, and also just time away from the business in, you know, travel and that sort of thing. But the, in the branding of it, particularly with the higher end properties and kind of the international exposure, has been really good. So, you know, I'm working with, you know, a set of clients now that, you know, there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, I need a, you know, I need a 2-bedroom for my daughter who's going to school in New York. You know, New York's a global city, so it's easy to get, you know, to be seen as this worldwide person. But I
Yeah.
always try to mention in my videos and brand it to myself and say, oh, you know, in New York we have, you know, we call it this. We have these same style of windows, or, you know, this would be worth this if it was in New York, or, you know, I try to mention that at least maybe once in the video without seeming too annoying. You know, keep mentioning New York, but I want people to know that first and foremost, I'm a New York guy, but, and they should think of me when they're thinking of New York real estate. But I'm also, you know, traveling the world and partnering with agents, you know, all around so that I could, you know, work with them on a referral basis.
I mean, that's really such an amazing result, right? You get not only people who have opportunities locally for you, or you know, they know people that have opportunities for you locally, and then also, hey, by the way, I see that you did this video in this other country, and maybe there's an opportunity that comes your way, and obviously you don't practice there, but now you of course can refer that out, and you know, whatever the rules are, depending, I don't know how every country works with that kind of with commission shares, but certainly it's something that should and be able to work. So and you know, here's what I was thinking when you were telling me, and I just wanted to sort of throw this your way, and I want you to tell me if you agree or would modify this idea,
Mhm.
because I was thinking, like, okay, if I was a listener, what might I do right now? And maybe I'm not going to be able to reach out to this big a castle in Scotland, for example. I don't have the resources or time or energy to do that. But could I do that in my own local community? Could I pick a super high end? For example, if my goal as an agent is to get more luxury listings, or if that's one of my objectives, then I might think, okay, well, I should probably get familiar with dealing with luxury properties. Well, I don't have any luxury listings. I don't have any luxury buyers at the moment, but there's luxury listings out there that are listed by other agents. Maybe I could reach out to them and say, hey, I want to feature your listing. I'll give you credit. I'll say it's, you know, your listing. I just want to tour the property and maybe highlight a couple of really cool things. And again, I don't know what most agents would say to that. I suspect maybe they'd say, well, I just want to see the final edit before you push it out, or something to that effect. But even if they end up not wanting you to actually release the video, which they probably would want you to, but even if they didn't, you know, Phil, you said something that was really hit me, which was you got familiar now and comfortable dealing with these higher end properties because you were now walking through and talking about them. And I would think even that alone would obviously increase your confidence and your competence around dealing with luxury properties, even though you might not have any yourself at this particular moment. You're doing a thing. I would think, or, and also I like the drone idea too, of getting a drone to sort of fly in through the window and having just a couple of cool creative ideas that, drones aren't that expensive really. I mean, you could do some pretty neat stuff. But if I was an agent in a local market and I was looking to get more visibility on my videos, I would absolutely go to whatever the highest price rentals and condos and single family homes or whatever, the most unique listings out there, and be like, this is a cool thing I got to show you, and see what that would do. Curious on your take on that.
No, I think you're right on. And no one is stopping you. No one is stopping you. And you will probably get, just as the very first reach out, you've never done this before, I bet, as long as you have a little bit of experience as an agent and you can write a decent email, I bet 20 or 30% of the agents will say, okay, sure. Yeah. The biggest thing would be convenience factor for them. When I go to a property, I need at least 8 hours in the property, and I try to schedule 2 days. So long form is way different than short form, but I would start with short form. There's a guy who does a great job with this. His name's Tyler Hassman, and I've had him, I've worked with him before. He does a lot on TikTok, and he gets a lot of his business from it. And the cool thing about what he does is he can go and he can shoot 4 or 5 properties in a day. Wow. And the feedback cycle is so much shorter that it's just less investment because he can edit it himself on CapCut and stuff. Now, there's a lot of agents who are doing this already. So you need to think about how you can do it either better or different, or, create a little bit more of a story for it, and, I can't help with that. Really, you're going to have to think about it yourself, listener. But I think that if you just try to get 10 or so out, try to get them done, and you'll get better, and then you'll get more comfortable on camera. Everything will get better because, one thing that we haven't talked about yet is just, I call it climbing cringe mountain, and just getting over that mental sort of pit in your stomach feeling of like, oh God, people are going to make fun of me. This is awful.
I listened to, there's a great video that Ira Glass, a New Yorker, put out. He's the host of This American Life, which is a very famous radio show and podcast here, of course, in America. And it's actually technically Chicago, but he's really a New York guy. But anyway, he does this video, and it must have been for, some sort of talk he was giving about how you have to be willing to do poor work that's not up to your taste standards until your skill develops to where you can match the output of the project with your taste, right? And he said what most people do is they have good taste. They know what's good. They try to create something, whether they write or they music or a poet or video or whatever, and it's not up to their standards, and it bums them out because they want it to be better. And they don't realize that that's the path, is actually to just keep doing it and learning and getting better. And eventually the expectation you have matches the reality of what you're producing. And then in what Ira says in this video, it's like a 2-minute video. I'll see if I can find it and send it out to our audience. But he says most people quit just before they're about to hit that level of competency that they're going to be. And then I also read a book, not by Mr. Beast, but I think it was his mentor, and you probably may have read it as well. I can't remember. It's a YouTube, sort of how to do YouTube book. And Mr. Beast is quoted in there. He's like number one guy. If anyone doesn't know, he's number one channel on, I believe, on YouTube. And he said your first 100 videos are going to be garbage. So he goes, don't do them as quick as possible, meaning put out crap. But he goes, it's going to be crap anyway. So do your best and don't think that it's supposed to be good. Just do your best. And he goes, after your first 100 or 10 or whatever that number is, he says 100, but he's a full-time YouTuber. He goes, you're going to start to get good. And he's like, you just don't quit before the good comes in, And so I thought that was good advice.
There's definitely some of that. I think though, I would sort of say maybe your first 100 minutes of content, because if you're doing, TikToks and that sort of thing, and they're 30 seconds long, maybe 200 of them is sure. But man, if you're just going to quit. The average person isn't Mr. Beast, who will count to 1 million on a channel and get, Mr. Beast, a lot of respect, goes out to him. Sure. But I think you don't have to have that much tenacity in order to do it. I just think because there's also, I think that, if you're, especially if you, the kind of person who I imagine, is listening, is already in real estate, or is planning on being, and they're probably not going to be able to try to fully become a content creator, 100%, but they're looking to augment their business with that. And so I would probably say, if you're seeing, creating a lot of content's great, and I think you definitely should, and you're going to get better through it, but you should also see what works, see what green shoots you have, and see what doesn't grow and just sort of withers and dies. And, don't think of, what the algorithm is saying to you, but think about, if a video does better, just realize that more people liked it. It's like, people, if it doesn't do well, then it's not an insult to you, but it's just that for whatever reason you lost people, or they weren't interested in the first place. And look at your last 5 videos, look at the one that did the best, and just think, okay, study it. Why did that one do better? What other thing that's adjacent to that could I do? For me, it was castles and chateaus. I tried doing some duplex apartments. They didn't do that well. I'm still going to do some New York content and some things like that, but I guess that people are, I'm some stuff's really working out for me. I will wander from there a little bit, but not too far, until I get that, until I sort of get permission by
the audience
video. Yeah. By the audience, that it does well enough that they're like, okay, like I want to see this. I also there's a cool feature on YouTube. After you get monetized, you can submit like, kind of like a poll to the audience. And I recently did one. It was like, oh, do you want to see this kind of property or this kind of property? Do you want to see ones that haven't been renovated yet? Or do you only want to see beautiful properties, that are finished? So that kind of thing. And you can get feedback and view your, the comments and everything as a conversation, more than just, I'm going to decide what I want to do, and I'm going to put it out there, and the audience is going to have to deal with it. Well, that's probably not going to do so well,
Right. And probably often I found in marketing that the ideas that I have, that I am confident this is going to get the result that I want, whether it's a video or it's an email campaign or any sort of print or digital campaign, most of the time I'm wrong. And what's interesting is I've learned that it's okay to be wrong, because all I have to do is listen to feedback. So you're saying this exact way is nothing's, or this video I thought was I put a lot of work and energy and it just didn't really get the result I wanted. Okay, well, maybe let's figure out why it didn't. And then let's, move what is doing well or what is doing better and do more of that. And I 100% agree. It's just the audience will tell you, your audience will tell you either verbally or non-verbally, here's what we like and here's what we don't like. And whatever your initial vision is for the content may change as a result of that.
Yeah. And within your niche, it's important to look at what someone who likes something that you like, or that you're trying to encourage them to give you a chance on the first one, right? Because they haven't heard of you. They don't know who you are. So what are other people kind of like you doing already? And what do their thumbnails look like? What are their titles? Because if that's your front door, and if they don't open the front door, they're not going inside of the house, and then they can't, you can spend all this time renovating your kitchen, and then the front door is locked and no one's going to come in, and YouTube's going to say, oh, people don't enter that door. Don't even show it to people. And then it's like, man, it's all this work. And there's a lot about Mr. Beast just talking about titles and thumbnails. But it is kind of true that if it's not interesting from just a half a second look, then fewer people are just, unless they're actively seeking you out and actively wanting to look at your thing, they're probably going to ignore it, and you're probably never going to get that exposure that you want. So, that's a really
and I can relate to that, because we have lots and lots of tens of thousands of listeners. We're very grateful for that, and thank you to everyone who's listening right now. And I've always published our video, our podcast episodes, not just in audio, but also in video version, which we dump into or I don't think we've always done this, but we've done it for the last 5 years or so, into YouTube. And we have the same thumbnail, just the title changes and we change the pictures, but it's the same thumbnail. It's not particularly engaging. And I've always been like, our YouTube channel just is not really growing. And it's not commensurate with the amount of listeners we have. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Oh, because again, at that first glance, that first, that first thumbnail, it's not that engaging. So I probably need to go back and re-thumbnail all of my images and create something a little bit more compelling and see what that does because it is something that's really, really important is we do look at those thumbnails and make a split second decision about whether we want to engage in that content.
Yeah, I kind of wish that it was all text-based and you could only do a title and there wasn't thumbnails, but that's not the world we live in. And, frankly, you can now you can hire someone to make thumbnails, on like Fiverr for like, they'll make you thumbnails for like $10 and you can they make you 10 and you just give them some different assets and say, what's interesting to me? And then I have what I call a thumbnail committee, which is like 20 people who are friends and content creators that I send out 4 or 5 thumbnails to. It's actually it's a grid with different thumbnails and different titles. And I just say top 2, what would you click on? And then I actually load it with an A/B test in YouTube, which you can do now. And it's almost always that my little group of my thumbnail committee is correct. Like it is.
No kidding.
Yeah. So if you just take some time with it, because I view how much time people are listening or watching, and a good thumbnail could do, 5 or 10 times as many views. And that's, at this point, it's like tens of thousands of hours of watch time is what we're talking about. So like that is a full-time job is 2,060 hours a year. If you're working 9 to 5, we might be talking about, several people's entire, 9 to 5 years. And it all rests on this title and thumbnail. Like, it's just, it's a crazy thing, but you should give yourself permission to spend a few hours on it because it could translate into, tens of thousands of hours of watch time over the course of your channel. And if you're thinking about starting a channel, just know that you're going to have to get a little obsessive about titles and thumbnails because basically every YouTuber is, because once all that data is in front of you, it's hard not to try to increase those percentages.
Yeah, and I think video is here to stay. It's funny because the vast majority of people who will absorb this content, this particular episode, is audio. And I was thinking about this the other day. I thought, why are audio podcasts still so popular? And they are. And I think it's because of commutes and people being able to listen to audio podcasts while they're doing other things, cleaning around the house. So I'm grateful that audio hasn't completely gone away because this podcast would probably not be as successful as in fact, it wouldn't be as successful as just a YouTube video channel. Although I would love that to not be the case. I'd love to build that audience. So please subscribe on YouTube. I'll send the links out. But what I am really grateful for with video is video does not seem to be going away. So this idea of building that skill set, maybe audio podcasts, maybe they do end up going away at some point, and we just want to watch things going forward.
I don't think so.
I don't know. My point is what video is definitely not going away, right?
No, it's definitely not. And there's some podcasts that work really well as on YouTube, and it's becoming bigger. I think you're wise to have you're wise to have it, but I think there's something like I've listened to so many of your episodes, and I've learned a lot of really great ideas from the other people on the podcast. And I think that it's sort of like I think of being in a podcast as like sort of sitting in a room with 2 people who you want to listen to, who are maybe hopefully, maybe like your role models or something like that, but also just an interesting conversation that you can just be a part of as you're doing the dishes or at the gym or commuting. I spend 100%. So much time. We don't have in New York, we have to show every single time on the listing side. So, I spend a lot of time commuting to my listings. So, I got a show on 86th Street, then I got a show down in the Village and back. So, that can be hours a day. And there's so many podcasts I listen to that way. And I'm not going to watch it all. There's some information density of a podcast that's like, it's only audio, but you can imagine what people look like when they're talking. You can, and we were discussing before the show about how important, pauses are and how important, vocal tone, and you convey so much information just with this, and you feel like you get to know people really well by hearing their voice. So
Yeah, and there's something about getting into somebody's ear versus their eyeballs that seems more intimate. And maybe it's because the imagination, the visual imagination takes over while you're listening to an audio podcast. You start imagining what's happening. You maybe you sort of see the conversation or the person speaking, and it feels more intimate. It's not got as many blockers or gates that maybe video has, and because video, there's a lot more opportunity to not like something about a video, right? There's just so many different visual elements to a video that there's could be something that turns somebody off visually, and then they're just like, okay, I'm out. Whereas with audio, it's a little bit easier in that sense because all I have to do is really focus on the quality of the content, the quality of how it sounds. And so I do hope that the shows like this continue on, for a long, long time, because it's much easier to get an audience for me this way than on video, because, it's just what I do. But if I was an agent, practicing, then video obviously would be what I would focus on, because it obviously is more tuned into our actual industry. So I love this, that you really sort of just asked your way into these luxury properties and just said, hey, I want to do this thing. Can I? And some of them said, sure. Like, what's the harm? It seems like a good idea. We want, we want promotion. And you got more comfortable with those properties. You became more competent doing the videos on YouTube and being the host and being the the talent within the video. And then it just all of a sudden now it's like, oh, Phil is this New York realtor, but he goes all over the world to look at these high-end properties. That is a luxury brand aesthetic, I think, and it is absolutely brilliant, because it shows that Phil really walks the talk, right? He is going into these properties. He is talking about these amazing homes, and he's able to do that for your home as well. So I think it's yes, it's expensive. Agreed. Yes, very expensive. And it also helps build the brand that is going to help your individual business, because it legitimizes you even more so. Like, I'm a global guy, and I go all over and I do this. And I just think it's one of the smartest things I've seen marketing wise for video for agents ever. So I'm so impressed, Phil, that you have built this. I really want to remind everybody, follow Phil on YouTube. Philip Wells, Philip with one L, Philip Wells with two L's, real estate. We'll have a link to his YouTube channel in the show notes. Also, you can watch him on Instagram, which is Phil Wells _RE. Link to that as well in the show notes. Phil, I'd love to ask, you've been in the business 10 years. What would you, knowing what you know now, what would you say to your 10 year ago self who was just starting out, that would have made your journey a little bit less uncomfortable to build your real estate practice? Because again, we have to remember, you were in a very uncomfortable situation, didn't have a sphere of influence, didn't have, the 6 friends you had probably weren't like, I'm ready to buy my $2 million 1-bedroom in the West Village. Although if you did have that, amazing. Most people don't. So I'm suspecting you obviously didn't have that either. So what would you tell your 10, yourself 10 years ago that would have helped? Because maybe this will help our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting what you said earlier about how you hear this a lot, people who really had to grind. And in some ways, I have an agent, they're not an agent anymore. They had kind of an easy go of it for their first couple of years. They had, like you said, those friends or those, friends of their parents or whatever, who they did. Like, I remember I was struggling to, do whatever I could, and little sales and a bunch of rentals and whatever. And they came in and did like a $3.5 million deal as their in their first month. And I was like, oh man, they're going to just crush it, like doing so well. And then they were, as they got smaller deals, they were all disappointing. They were all like, I have to work with this, $750,000 buyer or whatever. And I was like, hey, that's a pretty good buyer. I'll take them, And I think something about walking up the ladder slowly and being comfortable in each rung is good about, so I think that as long as you're moving, as long as you feel like you're getting more confidence, you're learning the market better, I think in some ways, although, yeah, I would have loved to, climb the chain, your ladder faster. I think there's sort of a curse of too much too quick when it comes to real estate.
So maybe you would have said to yourself, don't worry about the results not coming as quickly. They will come based on the discipline and the effort you're going to do from every single day. 10 years from now, it's all going to work out, kind of thing. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? Is telling the younger self, you are on the right path.
You're on the right path. And I think that I helped a lot of agents in the past because I sort of felt like I'm kind of roped into helping so-and-so with it. Like, yes, I was seeking out opportunities, but I was also kind of like, I don't know. I was always kind of the nice guy in the office helping someone with their, with the printer if it wasn't working or whatever. And I always thought I should be focusing on getting clients and building my business. And, this is a distraction. But in reality, the path that I had to success was, and still is, by helping people as I'm building a team, by helping people, and just by helping people with the printer, or by, someone formatting a spreadsheet for someone, or, when someone's, there's a lot of people who are, need a little bit of help at my office. And there was recently a flood in our office, and it was like going and covering people's monitors with trash cans, trash bags, to make sure they didn't get wet, and moving their documents and whatever. And I find that just by those small things that you do can just multiply to the point where people are saying, hey, can I join, the Marcus Wells team? And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, of course. That's amazing. Like, I can't believe you are even thinking of that. Like, I'm happy to, yes, I'd love to start that conversation, but also I'm happy to just keep helping you, and I think that just viewing those interactions as, investments, stepping stones, it's like, there's really, I always thought, everyone is out for their own, and it's, real estate's very cutthroat, but at least within our company, or if you can find that, if it is, then go somewhere else, go to a different company where you feel supported, and, your manager will give you time of day, and like everyone's investing in you and you're working together, because there are a lot of places like that, even in New York. And I'm sure there is. Just make sure you're happy in the office, in the environment that you're in, because it's so important. Regardless of the name on the door, it's so important to be with people that you're comfortable with, and who are helping you.
I have one last question, because you are a fan of one of my favorite authors, Stephen Pressfield. For anyone who's not listening, Stephen Pressfield is actually a very storied author. He's written a ton of books, fiction and nonfiction. And he wrote this book, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago now or so, called The War of Art, which was sort of a play of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. He sort of just flipped it around and talked all about, it's a small book. It's a very quick read, but there's so much in there. And it's really about basically this idea of the amateur and the professional, and sort of how to become the professional, because the professional, all the spoils go to the professional. The amateur, has a lot of pain and failure to it. And when you make the decision to become a professional, you're moving from amateur to professional status, and you run into resistance. So those are kind of the three big things of the book: is how do you overcome resistance? How do you move from amateur to professional? And it's one of these books that, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much about it, but
you're doing a great job.
It really impacted my life, and it was a huge seller. Probably a lot of our audience knows it. Even if you're not a creative, I really encourage you to get the book, because he'll talk a lot about writing because he's a writer, but it really applies to just about anything in life. And it's not specifically about writing. It's about sort of treating, like Phil did when he first got his job at Corcoran. He sat in the office. He stayed there from 9 to 5. That's what a professional does. Professional stays in the office, learns. He wasn't the amateur, sort of doing it, sort of not doing it, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But tell me your experience with The War of Art.
Yeah, similar to yours, just a transformational. You read this book and you're like, oh, like what really got me was a little bit less the professional, but more the resistance, because everyone has I always thought, just, I have this feeling because I don't really want to do it, or what, it's this kind of like, I don't know if you've seen Fern Gully, but it has that kind of that sort of weird, like little monster of oil or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like this weird darkness that you just, whatever it is, if it's going for a run in the morning or if it's this or if it's that, there's this feeling of resistance. And he does such a good job of defining it and putting it in, anyway, it's a fantastic book. I loved it. It was one of those transformational books for me. And the fact that it's for both of us, I just wrote this in our email exchange because I just thought maybe it would connect with you. And I'm so glad it did. But there's this one story in the book that really stuck with me that I wanted to read here.
Please.
And it's just, he has a bunch of these little short chapters.
Which is what I love about Stephen Pressfield is, in particular in The War of Art, and also A Turning Pro was a sequel, which is about becoming professional, which is also written in the same style. These are 1 to 2 page chapters. He's such a good writer that what I am amazed that he's able to do, as I'm verbose and I say a bunch of extraneous things that probably aren't that useful. He pulls all of the extraneous out and every sentence just hits. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I just thought I could read this one. And yeah, if anyone's reading, like, it's probably a couple hours, you can read this whole book or less. It's so short and you'll just kind of want to go through it. Even if you go to a bookstore, I bet you could read it in the bookstore without even. And I don't even think that Pressfield would mind. He just seems like such a cool guy from this book that, like, he just really wants to, like, help other writers and creatives. And anyway, great book. But I'll read this chapter called Largo. In my 20s, I drove tractor trailers for a company called Burton Lines in Durham, North Carolina. I wasn't very good at it. My self-destruction demons had me. Only blind luck kept me from killing myself and any other poor suckers who happened to be on the highway at the same time. It was a tough period. I was broke, estranged from my wife and my family. One night, I had this dream. I was part of the crew of an aircraft carrier. Only the ship was stuck on dry land. It was still launching its jets and doing its thing, but it was marooned half a mile from the ocean. The sailors all knew how screwed up the situation was. They felt it as a keen and constant distress. The only bright spot was there was a machine gunnery sergeant on board, nicknamed Largo. In the dream, it seemed like the coolest name anyone could possibly have. Largo. I loved it. Largo was one of those hardcore senior non-coms, like the Burt Lancaster character, Warden, in From Here to Eternity. The one guy on board the ship who knew exactly what's going on, the tough old Sarge who makes all the decisions and who actually runs the show. But where was Largo? I was standing miserably by the rail when the captain came over and started talking to me. Even he was lost. It was his ship, but he didn't know how to get it off dry land. I was nervous, finding myself in conversation with the brass, and I couldn't think of a thing to say. The skipper didn't seem to notice. He just turned to me casually and said, "What the hell are we going to do, Largo?" I woke up, electrified. I was Largo. I was the salty old gunny. The power to take charge was in my hands. All I had to do was believe it. So that's, it keeps going. But the idea that, yeah, it's all in your hands. And what I found, to bring this to real estate, is, in New York, we have these complex transactions involving boards, and you've heard it before from other people on your show, and I think the listener probably has as well. But we always use a real estate attorney. When we have a closing, there's like 8 people in the room. Like
the co-op board has to accept the new the person buying the home. They have to first. For anyone who doesn't live in New York or hasn't dealt with co-ops, this is part of the process. Is the person goes in front of the board, bears their financial life as well as their sort of personality to the board, and just says, "Hey, I want to make sure they want to make sure you're a culture fit, so that you don't move in and destroy the good will of the building by being a jerk." It is very complicated. You could have somebody who has a cash offer, is just going to pay, right, and maybe the condo board goes, we don't like that guy.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's wild, and anyone who wants to have a discussion about that can connect with me, because it's like joining a country club, and you have to be financially qualified, and you have to all know the right people, and you have to, it can be a little ridiculous, and but with all of these moving parts, sometimes it can feel like the attorney's in charge, or but as the real estate agent, something I learned is you are Largo. Like, you are the one moving everything forward. You're the one who is, you have to, don't let anyone else drive the ship because you're driving it. And like, the assumption should always be, when you have a listing, when you have a buyer, when you are involved in a deal, like, yeah, the attorney might be working on the contract, but you should read every page of that contract. Like, you need to be, don't just, and like, if it's a title company where you are, don't just let them, like, you need to be on top of every aspect of this because, you're the one in charge. And once you take ownership of it, your clients are going to feel it. Always call the client before they call you. Always try not to be on the defensive. Try to just be proactive, and you'll get a lot better results. So this Largo, once you realize that you're Largo, you can do a lot better for your real estate business.
And we should also mention that becoming Largo or becoming the one in charge is going to be a little bit painful. So we have to realize the only way to get better at anything is by pushing up against, resistance. And resistance, whether it's exercise or whether it's becoming, more comfortable doing a particular type of listing or reaching out to clients and having conversations or deepening, these are skills. These are all skills, and they're not supposed to go perfect right away. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is, if you're in a little bit of distress, if it's a little scary to put out a video or to pick up the phone and call that expired listing, good. Like, the fear that you're feeling, it probably, if it's a healthy thing for you to do, you're on the right path. The fear is there to tell you it's supposed to be a little bit scary. And here's the good news: over time, it'll be a lot less scary. And so what I try to do with fear around good ideas is I try to use the fear signal as an indicator of I'm on the right path. Fear is good. It's not fun to feel fear. I hate that I'm afraid of so many things, but I know that that's what leads me into, a better quality of life, and pushing against my boundaries and continuing to just learn new things. But I have to be willing to deal with some of that pain. And it's short term. The good news is it's all short term, the discomfort. And, and then eventually over time you develop competency and all of that happens. So the best time to start is now, right? So whatever particular skill, I hope this has been really inspiring to anyone listening. And Phil, thank you so much for your explanation of how you do video marketing and how you built your brand and sort of the challenges along the way, and some really just amazing tactical advice for anyone out there. Really couldn't thank you enough on behalf of our audience. We thank Phil for spending an hour with us today, and also want to remind everybody, please, you got to see some of Phil's videos. I mean, there's a reason he's gone viral, and his videos are incredible. So Philip Wells Real Estate is the YouTube channel. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. Remember, Philip is with one L, Wells is with two L's, and we will also have a link to his Instagram account, which is Phil Wells _RE. And, he is with the Marcus Wells team. By the way, Phil is a New York City agent, also, deals in different boroughs and not just Manhattan. But if you have clients that are moving in and out of New York City and are looking for a good agent, Phil would love the opportunity to connect with you to see if he might be a good option for one of your clients. Phil, what's the best way one of our listeners could connect with you if they see any synergy there?
Yeah, you can definitely send me a DM on Instagram, which is great. Or you can email me. It's first initial last name, pwells@corcoran.com. And yeah, I love it when people, email. It's cool to know that people heard this. And if they have any questions about, I'm always happy to hop on the phone and, talk with them about YouTube or real estate, New York, pretty much anything. So.
And Phil, I think you have potentially a second career if you want one. If you probably don't have time for one, you definitely don't have time for one. But you could also do, I think, a lot with voiceover work. I imagine you've probably heard that before. What I really so much appreciate in the way you've been sort of communicating during our interview is, and I really want everyone to, if you can, if you didn't pick up on this, go back and listen to how Phil responds. He's very precise. We don't hear ums and ahs very often. And his sentences are short and concise and really right to the point. He cuts the fat out. Whereas me, I sort of blather on and probably need to edit myself more effectively. Phil does a great job of that. And I think that would be super helpful, not just in video making or being a podcast guest, but in talking with clients, is getting really having not so much a script in front of you that you're reading from, but knowing what you want to say. Here are the 5 things I need to get across in this conversation. And what's the most direct way I can do that? So that my client gets the answers that they want. Because as Phil said, you don't, ideally the client doesn't call you first with a question, you reach out. So you have to sort of know, now's the time to have the conversation about X, Y, and Z, and rehearse, plan. And eventually you end up just getting good at these kind of conversations. And I think, Phil, your tonality, the way you speak is really, something we didn't really talk about on the show, but I imagine our guests will probably give you feedback like that to say your voice is really soothing. And that's something as well. I don't want to we won't get into any of that now, but there is something to be said for everyone sort of having an awareness of how their tone comes across to other people when they communicate. And this is a skill. This can be developed. You can change part of the way you communicate. And, look, communication is so important in this business. So anyway, Phil,
yeah, we'll have to, maybe 3 months from now, we'll do a second conversation, because that's one of the things I appreciate most about your show is the presence that you have and sort of the musicalness of your, you have, I heard something once and it said that most people use 2 notes when they speak. They'll talk a lot like this, and then they'll talk like this, and then they'll come back like this. And I forget who it was, but it was a vocal coach, and they went to a piano and they played a song with just 2 notes and said, okay, 3 minutes of that. How boring was that? Then they played something with just, 2 octaves or so. And people aren't going to listen to you if they, if you just, and ever since I heard that, I've just noticed it. It's like, you have to put a little bit of energy into it. Don't sound like you just woke up, like, you need to have a little bit of, and it doesn't have to be fake, but just, I think that's one of the reasons that your podcast has been successful, is because you bring, energy and presence to it. And you've done enough episodes that you've definitely overcome any nerves that would flatten it. You don't want whatever you're saying to feel flat. Otherwise people just don't believe it, don't trust it, whatever. You need to connect authentically with your people, if it's on the phone or if it's on a podcast to, 10,000 people.
Yeah. And if anyone out there is, really impressed with my podcast, please realize that my first 100 episodes of the podcast, you do not want to listen to. I mean, actually, they're probably okay, but they're not what we're doing now. So, it's that old expression from, I don't remember, it's like a Zen saying. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I think it's a Zen koan or something to that effect, where it's before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So it's just about continuing down the path, keep doing the work. And it's not, it's not fun to do push-ups, but they lead to bigger muscles, so that's what I try to remember. And Phil, I am so grateful to thank you for all the kind words, by the way. That meant a lot to me. I so appreciate that. We appreciate you, the listeners, as well. Phil and I thank you. We already thanked Phil on behalf of the audience, but Phil and I want to thank you as well. We appreciate you. We hope that this was helpful for you. I know that it was, but I really hope it resonated with you. Please let Phil know how much you appreciated him coming on the show. Would mean a lot to me and Phil as well. So reach out to him, check out his YouTube channel, see what he's doing, and see how you could take an inkling of that idea and maybe bring it to your local market and become the YouTuber in your local market that maybe ends up getting people who you wouldn't normally come across in your normal spheres of influence. Also, check out Phil on Instagram and on his YouTube channel, Philip Wells Real Estate. You definitely want to like and subscribe, because he does really cool things, goes all over the world touring these unbelievable properties, and really, really cool. So Phil, thank you so much. We will see everybody on the next episode. Thanks.